There we go. There we go. All right, thanks everyone. But yeah, if you're not speaking, please mute. If you're on a phone, I believe mute is *6. Fun Zoom fact. All right, Izzy, could we go to the next slide, please? All right, so just a quick agenda today. We're just going to start off with a quick recap of where we were. I know it's been a while. And then I'm pleased to share some updates on the Climate Ready Oʻahu project, particularly relating to some of the process that our team has been going through for the past months, as well as exciting community outreach campaign that we've concluded, and some other tools that are going to be rolling out as a companion resource along with the Climate Ready Oʻahu adaptation strategy. We do have a topic that we are eager to discuss with you all today relating to community climate championship as a model or as potential models. We're going to obviously have an opportunity for public input on matters not on the agenda. And then we also want to spend a little bit of time at the end just talking about next steps, what comes next. This is, as many of you probably know, the 5th of 5 community advisory Hui meetings that we had originally been described in the initial outreach. So a little bit of what comes next and opportunities to engage you folks on what you would like to see coming next. So Matt.
Yes, and sort of my mea culpa from the last meeting, past practice, we would have provided the draft meeting minutes in advance. We were a bit delayed, so we won't be formally accepting meeting minutes, although I think folks remember process isn't really voting, as this is not a formal body like a traditional sunshine body, though we've been treating it very much like that because of all of your great expertise and participation. So a little bit, just wanted to recap, what we worked on last time, where we covered, again, most of the project updates. We were getting into this concept of different, how can we prepare something that is communicable, digestible, approachable, understandable. And if you recall, we discussed different ways that the final document or final strategy could be presented, whether it was by sectors, meaning infrastructure sectors or economic sectors, or if it was appropriate to potentially structure the document and the strategy in response to the 5 primary hazards that we were discussing. And there's been significantly more negotiation internally, again, because we're working with you all to advance the specifics of actions, but also ensure that this is a tool and a resource that can be communicable, understandable, and that people can see opportunities for their organization, household, or advocacy to advance any of the specific strategies or actions. We hope to have more of the outlay of that in subsequent public community forum, including open house underway, and then ongoing online engagement. So that was really the crux of the discussion last time, trying to think through how to take such a massively overwhelming challenge, break it down into component parts that we can address through specific strategies, actions, policies, investments, physical projects. And admittedly, there's still more work to be done because it is a lot of interrelated kinds of concepts, and we want to make sure that it not only is painting the picture of the challenge, but presenting an opportunity to improve upon environmental and community conditions and present this image of what we need to do to ensure that we are a climate ready Oʻahu. So really thinking through sort of the positive, forward-leaning, action-oriented voice and message, and that doesn't always neatly break down into here's sea level rise adaptation, or here's critical roadway approaches, because that has even the weight of more of a negative connotation about the thing that we're trying to do. So it's both the specifics of the actions, but again, the inspiration, motivation, and presenting this path forward that we can and will become a climate ready Oahu, as long as we commit to the things that will help improve and prepare community. So that's an overly simplistic recap of the project, or sorry, the meeting number 4, which as always, the presentation materials and the recording are still available online at the Climate Ready Oahu Advisory Hui website, which we can put in the chat in case anyone is interested.
Great, thanks, Matt. Yeah, we'll get that link in the chat momentarily, but for now, Izzy, could you take us to the next slide, please? Okay, so I wanted to provide some updates on some of the process that we've been going through. This is a quick overview of the different phases, the many phases that we've sort of gone through in getting to where we are today. So as you can see, we are in a very exciting phase of the project. We are actively writing the strategy. We are actively picking and choosing, what should be in and what shouldn't be in at this point. But how we got here is sort of a long journey involving, an initial visioning process. And I know that we've spoken to this advisory hui about vision at our last meeting. There was a risk assessment process that produced the Honolulu risk assessment. It identified our 5 hazards. And then there was a good look at city operations and city services, and a deep sort of dive into actions that are related to city entities, city services, city properties, things that can be done by the city to advance adaptation. And we had a consultant ICF that was instrumental in helping to lead that process. That contract has been wrapped up. And so, following the ICF portion of the project, this team wanted to make sure that other scales and other types of action were also covered. And so we spent time doing outreach and identifying partners, where we really had the opportunity to talk about community scale and individual scale adaptation action. So these are things that are kuleana, not just of the city, but of members of the community, partners, individuals, community-based organizations. And we took all of the things that we heard, all of the actions that we found from the city, all of the hazard and hazard risk information, and we are currently compiling that. So if we go to the next slide, this is just another way to visualize the different layers of knowledge that are being built upon to inform Climate Ready Oahu. So this is, sometimes I call this the squid diagram, but really it's just another way of saying, all of the different sources of information, and of course the community advisory hui is one of them. We go to the next slide, please. So this is just a very simplistic diagram of the process that we've been going through over the last couple of months to process all of that information. So it was, as Matt mentioned, quite a lot of information. We had information from several rounds of virtual engagement, 2 different campaigns of in-person engagement around the island, several very large island-wide surveys, including the one that Daniel Naho'opili presented the results from at the last meeting. So we had lots of community takeaways. Our team also took a close look at other cities that have been doing adaptation planning to see what types of actions and strategies have been in their plans. Of course, we have the many and numerous city actions identified by our ICF consultants. And then we also had, of course, additional internal research based on what we know about the hazards. And all of that sort of ended up being, over almost 300 different potential actions that could go into the strategy, which is too much. And so we took all of those different potential actions. We asked ourselves a series of screening questions that are, on the screen. Is it effective? How well will this action actually mitigate climate hazards? Is there need? Is this something the city needs to act on? Is it locally relevant? Is this responsive to identified climate risks for Honolulu? Community buy-in, like can this, feasibility, can this be implemented? Community buy-in, is this something that we've heard support from the community? Identified lead, are leaders, whether they're in the city or in the community, already on board? And then very back of the napkin estimates on cost, time frame, and scale. So whether it's island scale, Ohana individual scale, or something in between. Looking at all of those different considerations, we kind of selected our priority actions. There are also several actions that could potentially become actions or be retained as actions in the strategy, but the majority of them actually are going to end up being non-priority actions because, as we know, climate change is a very broad topic and can relate to many things, but there really is a need, as we've heard from this group and from countless others in our engagement, to focus on the most strategic use of resources and to focus on the things that are going to really get us the farthest and are responsive to the things that we know are coming down the line here on Oʻahu. So this is sort of a snapshot of the adaptation actions gauntlet that we've been running these actions through. Some of the next steps are going to involve finalizing some of the way that we talk about these things. The climate adaptation strategy, of course, is an important opportunity for the city to consider vulnerabilities and potential actions, but it also is, as our office has learned, a critical communication tool in making sure that there is consistency and strategic thought put into how we talk about and how we advocate for action on climate adaptation. And so we really want to sort of get that piece right. So that's some of the work that we're doing currently, and we do hope to be able to share more information, potential future drafts with you all in the coming months. We will also have, we're also currently planning a public workshop, potentially in about a month at the end of August, to share more progress. So please keep an eye out for announcements on that. So done a lot of talking. Yeah, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to a team member, Haley Campbell, to talk about one of the other products that's being developed as part of the Climate Ready Oʻahu umbrella. The equity screen is something that we've had previous rounds of engagement about, and this is really something that's meant to be a companion resource for implementing the climate adaptation strategy. So Haley.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so as Alex mentioned, this slide is about the equity screen. And if you'd like to review the whole thing, there's the link in the chat to the presentation. But if you think back to a couple meetings ago, there was a big focus on equity and creating some type of screening tool to ensure that when actions are being implemented, that we really are prioritizing our frontline communities, our vulnerable communities, and really thinking with equity at the front of our mindsets. And after reviewing those meetings and also talking with community members and the surveys and all of these things that Alex mentioned that we've done, we decided to create more of a process presentation that is really going to help people connect equity to their project goals and outcomes. And as you can see on the screen, it has 7 steps, and it will take people from goal setting and project outcomes, which is kind of, your basic project management stuff anyways, and then collecting and analyzing data on things like the demographics of the community that might be impacted by the work that you're doing. Then to identifying partners and seeing who is best to work with, either internally and or externally, to make sure that this project can be a success. Then followed by co-creation and engagement where necessary, for ensuring that the action is really something that's also owned by the community if it is something that's going to be implemented as a community action. And then we have reassessing your project to make sure that it aligns with your initial goals and outcomes, remaining accountable to equity, and of course, implementation and continued learning. And what you see to the right is kind of a flow chart about how you can go about thinking about these different steps for the different projects. For example, there might be a project that's already started, and so you might not need to set project goals and project outcomes. So you might want to move on to the next step of collecting and analyzing data on the different demographics and potential climate hazards that might impact not only your project, but the outcomes of your project as well. And so the goal of the flowchart is to kind of help people who are using this tool better understand, where is a good starting place for that. And so this, you can review more of it on the presentation. There'll definitely be time for questions and further exploration of the equity screen, but we did want to give an update that all of the feedback that has gone into the equity screen before has transformed into this really, really cool presentation that allows people to be able to put equity at the forefront of their mindset when thinking about projects.
And David has a question, and well, I think this is a good moment, Alex, in the material on the updates of the project to field questions, but definitely wanted to provide a little bit more context. Haley, we kept saying you, and the primary users of this, when we set off to create it, we were thinking about when the city is out there implementing projects and works, but as a resource, it can be usable and useful for anyone. That might be a community champion or any private sector entity that might be taking action on their own. And this isn't to say that the city or others don't consider equity when they're doing work, but what it's really making sure is that we're explicit and intentional, and that there's a bit of a more institutionalized methodology so that we're having these moments to gut check and ensure that we're thinking about frontline communities when we're addressing climate change adaptation projects. David, do you want me to field the chat question, or you want to offer it out loud?
Yeah. I was just looking at these 7 steps, and I'm wondering, maybe we should start, maybe you can explain to me the definition of equity, because in other circles, definition of equity or impact on equity is the impact on poor communities, or people who don't have means, right? So I don't know if this is that kind of a assessment, or it's a little different, or if it's on people.
I'd say all of the above, but I'll hand it back to Haley as the lead,
Okay.
who can assist with some of the thinking, right, and the different terminologies that's used across equity, frontline community, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I think it's a really good question. I can drop a link in the chat quickly about with more information about how the office has been defining equity in the past. So there's the link for that. But yeah, I think Alex just copy and pasted the beginning part of that. But equity is definitely, as it mentioned, it's kind of a process as well as a practice. And so there's a bunch of different things that we can think about when we're talking about equity. And it might look different for different scenarios, depending on who might be the most disadvantaged group in a specific area. So if you're talking about, for example, You want to site the new landfill and you're going to put it in this really poor community that might already have other disadvantages. That's really an inequitable place to put the landfill, right? For instance, so that could be the cost on community you'd be thinking about is all of the compounding disadvantages and added ones that might happen because you put a landfill there, for example. So it might look different where you're putting a landfill versus maybe where you put a road, for example, that might have different communities that are impacted. And so when we're thinking about equity, it's kind of broad and it's important. And the goal of this kind of document is to really make sure that when we being, people who are using the screen, as Matt mentioned, in the city, but of course, community champions are thinking about equity. These are the types of questions that you're going to be answering through this process. I don't know if that answers your question or if you still have a follow-up.
I think it kind of does. And maybe you and Matt can steer me straight. This is on a broad macro level. Like, should we locate the roads inland more, or should we harden, or should we retreat, and things like that. This is not this is not adopting a building code requirement that requires every home to be blow tested, where they blow through the door. They try to blow the door to see whether any air escapes under it, and if not, or other window treatments that increase the cost of one single home by 20 grand that are not.
I think the motivation for the tool is hopefully that it's applicable in a variety of settings, so that it could potentially address some of those kinds of equity questions. As a new resource, I think we definitely need to test it. And I'm looking at number 5 there. We probably will have some learning opportunities to reassess even the use of this tool, the utility of the tool, the effectiveness of the tool, and then continue to learn through step 7.
Right.
So would certainly welcome feedback as it progresses. It will, as Alex mentioned, serve, forgot the terminology you used, a compendium resource with the strategy itself. And these are things that we're trying to integrate into our own efforts here at the city and in the office in particular.
I think everybody loves it. All the industries would love the idea of what you said, Matt, institutionalized methodology. So like you said, all these steps, and they'll be revised as we go along. But, having that kind of reliability and understanding how things are going to be approached as we face different challenges, that's a great, what you folks are doing is a great idea. My only comment would be, where's the word cost and where's the word impact? Because I cannot see on the purple stuff, at least I cannot read I'll read later the smaller print, but I would think one of the purple things would be cost and impact on communities, like low income communities. But we can take that offline. Go on.
That's great. And again, it's probably hard on the fine grain, and we very much welcome additional insight. There is a box about impacting Oʻahu communities. There's a lot that can be defined, or even some of the questions beg questions of what is meant at any different potential application of the process.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt, it's Dan Dunell here. And if it's helpful to take us down a detour of like 3 minutes, I actually have a cartoon slide that I was on a call about 6 months ago with the Arbor Day Foundation. And I think it really explains this subject well, graphically, if it's helpful, but if it's not, I can just send it to you offline.
Defer to Alex and the team.
I would love to see it.
Okay, well, if just stop sharing, I'll share my screen. It just really resonated with me, and I just want to share with the group. I searched for it. So, and I think it goes to David's question here. So this box up here, the inequity or inequality, is unequal access to opportunities. And then the equality here is when each group gets the same height ladder. But that's not enough, was kind of the pitch that this person who I heard explain this. Equity is this group who's been disadvantaged gets a taller ladder so that they can access the resource, in this case, apples from the apple tree. And then that results in justice, which is what, you know, the person making this presentation who has a PhD in this field was trying to make. And I just thought it was a cute way of kind of thinking about it, because people talk about equal a lot, but equal is not equity. And I think that's a distinction. So kind of to support David's point, you know, we might need to put more resources in a certain area so they get a taller ladder, so that it corrects some inequality that has occurred in the past. So equal is not the same as equity. So anyway, thanks for the detour. I'd be happy to send you this graphic. I don't know if it's copyrighted, but I just loved it because it was a treat. And the ladder heights kind of
I think the original source material might be copyrighted, but I think the only caveat, as we're pulling the screen back up there, Dan, is that, you know, you went from box 3 to box 4. I don't think the equity results in justice. I think justice was a different proposition about changing the inherent systems there.
Yeah. Totally. But it's a cartoon. You got to smile.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Great.
I do like that, and if you wouldn't mind sending it, well.
I will. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's one of the values of this Hui conversation is we can all learn from each other. And it just happened, like I said, I was in this thing about 6 months ago. And what do you remember from 6 months ago? A cartoon. So, you know, that tells you a lot.
I'll also share a little bit more background on sort of the thought behind how the tool is going to be used. So as Matt said, this is really a framework. It gets at a methodology and a common framework for considering and building consideration of equity into various stages of a project. So it's not something that happens once at the beginning and then you don't have to think about it again. I think what this multi-step screen is a reflection of is the fact that equity is considered in different ways at various stages of where you are in your project. And so we actually just yesterday had the opportunity to go over to our sister office, the Office of Economic Revitalization, and they are going to be some of the first beta testers of the equity screen on some of their programs. So we're very excited to work with them on getting feedback on making this, you know, as tailored and strategically refined as possible, so that it really is a helpful tool. But as a framework, I think it could be used by anyone who's trying to design or consider how to think about equity for their own projects. So, sorry, Haley, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, no, y'all are good. Dan, actually, that's one of my favorite all-time equity explanation graphics. I learned about that in college and it was really amazing for me. So I'm so glad that you were able to share and took away that as well as something that's really memorable. And it's a really great segue actually to the next part about how we tried to be better about centering equity in our project. So we move on to the next slide. So as we mentioned in our last meeting, we had received a grant from the Capwork Consulting organization, and this grant provided us the opportunity to partner with the Malama Learning Center to host a series of in-person workshops on Climate Ready Oʻahu, and specifically on talking about different adaptation actions that community members might take in as climate change, unfolds in their communities. And so with that, we were able to host we hosted 5, and then Ma'o Farms actually hosted a 6th workshop on their own, which was really exciting. But we were able to host these 5 different workshops at different organizations in Waianae as well as on the North Shore, in order to really ensure that we are reaching a lot of the frontline community members that are going to be impacted the most by extreme heat changes as well as sea level rise as kind of our 2 major focuses. And a bit more background on that, and I'll share the link to the website in a moment so you can check out the different places that we went and see more photos and things like that. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Alex. And that will kind of give a larger overview. But I guess kind of to explain how the workshops ended up working out is the beginning of the workshop started with a short presentation just on the overview of the climate risks, which I'm sure you've all heard by now as members of the advisory hui. And then we played 2 climate change games, or I guess 1 game at different locations, one on Beat the Heat and one on Are You Sea Level Wise, at different locations depending on which hazard was more likely to be more impactful at that location. And these games we learned turned out to be a really amazing tool for inspiring conversations just about adaptation in general, but also on what people can do. So it's really focused on kind of the opportunities and the actions that people might have to adapt, and less so on this is really scary, what are we going to do? And so we made these 2 games and they're really well received, and a little bit more about those in a moment. But on the screen you can see the team with MLC team here on the left, and then the games being played on the right side of the screen. And it was just really an amazing experience, and we will be linking those games online eventually if you'd like to see more of them. But then at the end of the workshop, or to round out the workshops rather, we did a community hana at each of the places that we visited, not only to give back to the organization that took us in to help host, but also to give back to the Aina and really connect with what it is that we're also talking about when we're talking about climate adaptation, which is not just people, but also our environment and our land and our community that exist within all of those things together. And so it was really, really amazing to be able to have that opportunity. I wanted to give you an update on kind of what it ended up looking like and how it went. On the next slide, you will see kind of the overall outcomes. There were almost 1,000 key takeaways that were shared by community members during the event. And these key takeaways kind of boiled down to what people learned, what people suggested, what people thought was really interesting and exciting. And so it was amazing to see that the process that we went through was able to create such rich conversations. And in terms of our overall outcomes, there was an improved understanding of climate risks among community members. There was support for more climate adaptation, awareness raising, education, and actions overall that not just we can do, as the city, but things that you can do as an individual, as a neighborhood, as an organization as well. And of course, improved geographic distribution of participants that really centered our frontline communities and really allowed us to better reach the people that are most in need of climate adaptation resources and actions available to them. On the next slide, we have a couple of just call outs for some of the key takeaways that a lot of the community members shared with us to kind of give a snapshot or a reflection about what are the things that community members were thinking and talking about as those 1,000 key takeaways. And this is definitely not an exhaustive list, and I can share a link to kind of the wrap up event document here shortly. All right. There you go. And this document will give a much larger overview about how we kind of boiled these down. But in the end, there was a lot of learning about teamwork and communication being key for collective action that we need to adapt to climate change, the importance of investing early on in community solutions and really trying to work together. The Aloha spirit and tight-knit community are important social resources. So when thinking about resources, it's not just about money, it's about our community. What do we have to offer to each other? About the land, how can the land and nature support us as well in adapting? There was a couple points on the importance of local food systems and climate education and distributive energy as needs in the community, which is also a question that we asked, and wondering what are the needs for adaptation, not just what do you have, but what do you need? And then of course, investing in individual and community actions are going to be important for climate adaptation, and groundwater, stream flow, and clean watersheds being essential environmental assets. And the last one on the slide here is preparation and education can really help increase resilience in the face of a sudden shock that could occur that you weren't prepared for. Or you didn't think you'd be prepared for now, rather, but adaptation will help us be prepared for those shocks. And so these are some of the key takeaways that we heard from the community members, and all of these are really informing how we've been able to move forward in designing the adaptation strategy and picking the strategies and actions and prioritizing, as Alex mentioned before. These have all really been guidelines for how we're thinking about what is a priority for adaptation in our island community. On the next slide, I talked about as kind of the second takeaway as changes in knowledge and better understanding. And I know this chart here on the right is kind of seems like a lot, but to boil it down for everyone is we saw an increase in knowledge from about sea level rise hazards from the community members before and after the workshop, from 68% to 83%. So people really did feel like they learned a lot more about sea level rise. In terms of concern about sea level rise hazards, that increased from 77% to 92%. For knowledge about heat hazards, that increased from 62 to 80%. And from concerns about heat hazards, that also increased from 62% to 94%. So across the board, we were seeing massive jumps in people's not just understanding of the risks, but also their concern, which is maybe more likely to signify that they might be wanting to do more actions to make sure that they can be adapted to the changes that we're going to be seeing in the future. And that was really important to inform, why we're doing this work and why it's important, and making sure that, we do know that we need to do more education and knowledge and outreach, because people might just not know. And that was a really important takeaway for us from this experience as well. On the next slide, you will see the outcome demographics. So as I mentioned, the main goal was to better kind of center our frontline communities, but also make this map of the island a little bit more equal as we could in terms of where we're doing outreach. And so on the left, you can see from our workshop series that we did with Malama Learning Center that the highest color is the darkest purple. For anyone that can't see the legend, it's a little bit small. The highest purple, or the darkest purple rather, is the areas that we engage the most, and that really did increase. We don't really have a participation comparison here, but I promise you it increased a lot from these workshops. And then on the right, you see our total engagement, and the purple is relatively even across the island. A couple of places have a bit more people, but what's nice to see here is that we really did do our best to engage as many people from across the island as possible. But yeah, moving on to the next slide, just because I know we have a lot to cover still, is from all these events, what we learned about and thought was most important to talk about here today in terms of feedback and discussion is this idea that we really need to have collective action between the city and the community, and try to make that more direct, more frequent, more often, or more coordinated in some way. And so we've thought about calling this community championship, and we have a couple of ideas about what that could look like, but in general, what does that look like to us? And again, this is based off of what we heard from community members on a need for wanting to have more conversations in their community. And so community championship would be an initiative that advances awareness raising and education on climate impacts and adaptation activities that people could take by creating a bridge between the city and community members through some type of training and capacity building. So who would that involve, right? It would involve community volunteers who are motivated to maybe improve the well-being of their community. And what would it be including? It would be that they would be receiving training and ongoing support on climate risks and adaptation activities to disseminate into their community. And this is just our kind of initial idea about what this looks like, and we'll have an opportunity to exchange and explore this more in a minute. And then for why community championship, again, during our engagement series, we heard a lot from community about the need for community stewardship as being essential for creating a climate resilient and sustainable future. And we also know that with constantly changing information on risks and new initiatives and data, it can be hard for a community member to stay up to date. We know that, but it's also hard for the city to have the ability to go out and do these workshops in every community, for example, every weekend. We just simply don't have the amount of people for that, unfortunately, although that'd be really great. So we're trying to come up with some type of solution where we can all work together to make sure that we can ensure that people are empowered with knowledge and empowered with resources to adapt to climate change. Which leads me to the next slide on the different options. We have two options that we've been able to come up with, discuss with our community partners from our most recent outreach experiences, as well as with the individuals and community members who attended all of these outreach events. And the first one is some form of community climate leaders program. In this program, the city might provide formal training to people who want to sign up to be community champions on communicating climate risk information in their community and conducting climate adaptation support activities in their community. It could look like creating a climate adapters network, creating an onboarding or playbook, channels for communications between champions, virtual check-ins with champions, highlighting champions on the website, writing a certificate. These are all kind of ideas that we heard in community that we wanted to bring up here as possible ideas. And I will also share a document with that information, since it will be really important for the discussion component of this meeting today, for us to be able to have that with you. So this is just kind of the snapshot of what's on that document. On the next slide, we have our second option that we are thinking about doing, which is going more of the community-based organization route and trying to create a network and connecting of community-based organizations on grant opportunities that could relate to climate resilience work. As a city, that's kind of what we heard from our community-based orgs that we partnered with for these events, as their biggest need was really just finding opportunities to be able to invest in climate resilience opportunities, but also learning about how to speak on climate change in the work that they're doing, because a lot of times they're already doing this work, but they're just not calling it climate resilience work, or they don't know that it's climate resilience work. And so it's really a key component of this example or idea is some type of grant writing playbook or online discussion platforms, or maybe we can help review grants on like a, as needed basis for climate resilience. And these are just, ideas again that we've had that we're excited to explore with you today, which leads me to, I think, what might be the last slide before breakout rooms potentially, is the questions. So for the breakout rooms, we are going to go into, we have options to either talk about the Climate Leaders Program or the CBO Network Program. Either way, you can pick which one you want to do, but the questions are going to be, what are your initial reactions to even the idea of community championship? Second question, how do we make this a mutually beneficial relationship between the city and the community champions? What are the core needs to make sure that it feels beneficial on both sides? And how would you improve any of these ideas? Or even, do you have another idea that you've heard about that might be even better than these two options? But again, these are the options we gathered from the community, so we did want to bring those to the table today. And I think that's it before breakout rooms. Alex?
Matt, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, mostly just wanted to thank Haley and the team. As you can see, and Pauline is not, she wasn't able to join this meeting, but as you know, Pauline Sato from Oʻahu Learning Center is an advisory HUI member, and we were fortunate that we could partner up with Malama Learning Center, get this outside philanthropic money to support both their program, but also helping us to connect as sort of a hub and spoke model with these 4 other community-based organizations that hosted meetings and created the space for us to then come out and engage their families, their residents, their neighbors, et cetera. And this is not, we spoke in agenda item number 3 about ongoing efforts in terms of the specific strategies, the sectors, the actions. More of that is forthcoming. This was a recognized need as a potential opportunity where the city can't do everything. Community shouldn't be responsible all the time for their things either. So what new models might be available to help us bridge some of that resourcing and elevate our comprehensive and collective understanding so that we're all moving together and supporting advancements on climate change adaptation at different scales. And to David's question in the chat with different sectors, right? The notion of community is open to definition, and that's what we want to stay flexible to. We can't commit endless resources either on our ability to support community champions, but we do want to commit to some effort to, celebrate small wins, draw attention to those that are doing leadership within their sectors or within their geographic areas of interest, and just continue to think through this, because the climate and the environment will continue to change into the future. Climate change adaptation will be ongoing work, and we will need, in addition to plans, projects, programs, and processes, we'll need partnerships. And the more that we can find ways to work together, I think the better we will all be, and the greater social resilience we will develop so that we're stronger together.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so before we break out into breakout rooms, just wanted to pause and see if anybody had questions on this concept of community championship, and then we'll give you the opportunity to select a breakout room.
And my regrets that I'll have to drop off this meeting, as there is a very equally important community meeting about to start regarding the ʻaʻaliʻi flood mitigation project. If you're interested, honolulu.gov/ʻaʻaliʻi. There's a virtual meeting starting at 5:30, which we need to prep for. And then on Thursday, if you're interested, inclined, and in the area, there will be an in-person meeting at the ʻaʻaliʻi Golf Course Clubhouse, covering the same content and the same material, also starting at 5:30. Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo, Matt. Okay, so I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. In the rooms where we have some Google Jamboards that we'll send the links to, please let me know if you have any trouble opening that. And we just want to ask those three questions that were on the screen. So the two breakout rooms are going to be for the two different models. So whichever model you are more interested in either learning about or providing feedback on, that would be the breakout room you'd want to choose. And if you don't have a preference, let me know and I can assign you to one randomly. Okay, I'm going to open them now.
Sorry, Alex, what were the two champions, community champions, and?
So there are two different models for community champions.
Oh,
One is like a climate leader, train the trainer type of model, and the other is more of a network-based model for community-based organizations.
ooh.
So if either of those two options, and I can also just assign folks.
How do we choose? Is there a quick thing?
Yeah, so on the bottom there, you should see on your screen breakout rooms. If you click that, you should be able to see both options. I can also, if you let me know which, let me know which one you want, I can also send you. All right, so it looks like we've got Leslie and Adam. Leslie, I know you're on your phone, so would you like me to, which room did you want to be in? And I can send you there, I think. Okay. I'm gonna send her to climate leader. Awesome. All right. Izzy, I'm gonna go into the room.
Okay,
Climate leader.
I'm gonna stay here. If anyone needs
Okay.
anything.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll pause the recording.
Hey, so are you guys, while we have a moment, I know we're recording, but those games looked great. Are you planning to share them, or are they, or do they
Absolutely.
require great facilitation to utilize?
There is a slight learning curve in terms of understanding how to play and facilitate the game, but we are working on trying to make it as available as possible. So there are already, in my opinion, detailed instructions that were prepared. We're probably going to make like a video, like a facilitator's guide video that someone could watch to learn how to facilitate it. And then we do eventually want to put all of that on the Climate Ready Oʻahu website so that folks can just download it. We've heard from teachers, for example, that they see a lot of potential to adapt those games into lesson plans. So
Cool.
yeah, we want to do that hopefully within the next few weeks, definitely within the next month.
Yeah, I'd appreciate, just an email blast saying it's up there, take a look if you're interested, kind of thing. Just as an aside, I had a side conversation with Yvonne as the breakout. The Iolani School middle schoolers made a great card game. It's called Tremendous, and it's about resources, and then you get like, hazard, and you need more nutrients, and it's super good. And I mean, kids developed it, and my 10-year-old son, I got a deck of these cards. He tells me, "Oh, let's play Tremendous." I mean, multiple times, because it's a fun way of learning. I cannot underscore enough how games are a great way to engage. So that was the thing I got most excited about with what you guys did, is like heat and, oh, we gotta, we're gonna die if we do this, so we gotta try and figure out this. And yeah, it's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I would love to. Maybe I can reach out to Yvonne to see if I can get my hands on a copy of.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to get more decks. I only have one deck. So, and
Yeah.
I actually sent a copy to Civil Beat, and I said, get Lee Cataluna to write a story about this, because it is an awesome game. And all ages. Yeah, try and get a copy. I don't know.
Great.
Yeah, but to Dave's point, these Iolani school students are talented. They're engaged. They want to make a difference, and anyway, enough said. Back to your meeting.
Thanks, Dan. I hope that you both rooms were productive. I want to see if maybe one person from each room can share like a key insight or top line takeaway from your breakout group. Should we start with room one? I can flip a coin if you're in, if no one wants to go.
Alex, are you room one?
I was room one, yeah.
Okay, cool. Just so people know.
Well,
Dan,
our meeting
go
was
share-
raucous because David and I couldn't agree on anything. But I
We couldn't
think
agree on losers.
and
No,
Yvonne
losers.
participated until she had to leave. And I think the big takeaway was this has got a lot of potential in this idea of leaders and engaging existing groups and so forth. But it's probably worth going back and bouncing out some more questions, and like, is leader or competition or champions, are these the right names? I think one tangible suggestion, maybe there's a culturally appropriate Hawaiian terminology to anchor into. Because there's a lot more, but it's on the Jamboard. Yeah.
Thanks,
So I
Sam.
don't know, David, if you had anything else to add. Okay, we're done. Group 2, educate us.
Haley, you summarized for us. You did a great job taking notes.
Oh, what? Okay. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I can summarize. In general, this group felt that they wanted to join this breakout group because they thought that it was in a way a more realistic idea that doesn't necessarily rely on people volunteering to be a part of a program. So that was kind of at first a general takeaway about why they were in this group, but ultimately they thought that partnerships would be really important, clearly defining the roles about, you know, what is a CBO role and what CBO, community-based organization, what is a CBO role, what is the city role, and really being clear that the city needs to make sure that they're pulling the weight too and helping to try with minimizing bureaucracy when it comes to, you know, you get a grant and then you're excited to do this awesome adaptation activity, but then suddenly because of all these other things that happen with the city, you can't get a permit or someone's not getting back to you or whatever the case is. And so that would be a really big help, and something that they think could improve the idea is some way of trying to make sure that when we're working with community-based organizations, we're also trying to reduce barriers where possible. And I guess maybe the last thing to note is that it was noted that, you know, we're not just trying to reach community-based organizations, we're trying to reach the people behind the community-based organizations. And oftentimes these organizations already do a good job at that. And so it's figuring out in this type of network, you know, what is truly our ask and need from the city in terms of trying to make sure that, you know, maybe the climate education for adaptation activities is being shared more widely, and figuring out in the network, how does that relate differently to Hawaiian Electric versus the North Shore Community Land Trust versus KS. It might look different for different people. So that was an important thing to recognize as well. And I think that kind of summarizes everything, but definitely feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
Okay, well, Kahikino or Adam, if you have anything else that you want to add in the chat, feel free, but I do want to respect everyone's time and sort of keep us moving on the agenda. Izzy, could you bring back up our presentation, please? Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So at this time, you know, we want to make available any input from the public. I don't think that there's any members of the public on the call, but certainly if there's any matters not on the agenda that any of the HUI members want to raise, this would be an appropriate time. Okay, hearing none, can we go to the next slide? So yeah, as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, or as we reminded you all, this is the 5th of 5 planned community advisory HUI meetings. We are very grateful to everyone for all of your time that you've spent with us for the past year plus talking about these important issues. Clearly, there is more to be done and there's more to be said. There is certainly more to share when it comes to the actual climate adaptation strategy and the actions, the details. And so we want to just make sure that we hear from you all how or if you want to continue to stay involved. So if you wouldn't mind, and we will email this out as well, this link, but there's just a very quick 2-question survey to, you know, if you'd want to opt in to continue to engage around the adaptation strategy, and if so, in what form. And then on the same token, we felt that the community advisory HUI being made up of organizations from the community is kind of like a precursor to, in some ways, the concept of community championship. And so if there are, certainly if there's more or that you want to share, or if you are interested in this concept and want to continue to engage with us as we figure out how to build it, we would love to hear from you. Maybe we'll start maybe we'll start a working group or something just to get some brainstorming done. And or if your organization is an organization that you think would fit well within some model of community championship and you want to be a participant, we'd love to hear that as well as any other comments that you might want to share with us about how we can stay connected moving forward. But we are not currently planning on having a sixth community advisory HUI meeting unless we hear otherwise. But we certainly want to keep you all as engaged as you'd like to be. And as we have more to share about the document as it becomes final. So I think the link is in the chat. If anybody has any problems with that, feel free to reach out. But yeah, I think that's all we had on our agenda. I know folks need to run. So thank you so much. And we will stay on, for another few minutes in case anybody wants to stay behind and talk about anything else. But I'm going to stop recording now and we will officially call the meeting to a close. So mahalo, everyone.